The Hoop Heads Podcast is brought to you by Head Start Basketball.
Hey Hoop Heads! Wanted to take a minute to shout out our partners and friends at Dr. Dish Basketball. Their Dr. Dish shooting machines are undoubtedly the most advanced and user-friendly machines on the market, and they truly accelerate skill development faster than ever. Learn more at drdishbasketball.com and follow their incredible content at Dr. Dish B-Ball on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Mention the Hoop Heads Podcast and save an extra $300 on the Dr. Dish Rebel, All-Star, and CT models. Also, make sure to check out the new Dr. Dish Home Machine, which is perfect for these crazy times when gyms and schools are closed. Visit drdishbasketball.com for details. That's a great deal, Hoop Heads. Get your Dr. Dish shooting machine today.
Hi, this is Asim Rastogi from Essential Coaching, and you're listening to the Hoop Heads Podcast.
Hey Hoop Heads, we all hate ankle sprains, and they happen way too often. Ankle injuries are the #1 sports-related injury. Arise is trying to change that. With the iFast, your athletes get preventative protection and full mobility. Athletes no longer need to wear bulky braces that limit performance and give mediocre protection. Anyone playing sports should be using these products. Keep your athletes in the game. Don't wait for them to get hurt to take action. Visit www.arise.com, spelled A-R-Y-S-E, and use the code HoopHeads to get 20% off the future of performance. That's ARYSE.com with promo code HoopHeads to get 20% off.
You've seen the way a team operates when it's all in and everything's healthy, and you realize, like, holy smokes, I was missing so much. I can't go back now.
Adam Bradley is an entrepreneur, speaker, and coach. Adam is one of the original founders of the Hardwood Hustle Podcast. The Hustle is a resource designed to educate, empower, and encourage coaches in the basketball community and beyond. In 2015, Adam launched the nationally recognized leadership program Lead 'em Up that provides coaches an engaging and cutting-edge curriculum they can use with their players and is now used in over 500 schools around the world. Adam serves as a mentor to many youth programs and schools in the Baltimore, Washington market. In addition, Adam is the director of one of the largest charitable golf tournaments in Maryland, the Bradley Open, and is a regular speaker at his home church, Journeys Crossing. We recently launched the Hoop Heads Mentorship Program. We believe that having a mentor is the best way to maximize your potential and become a transformational coach. By matching you up with one of our experienced mentors, you'll develop a one-on-one relationship that will help your coaching, your team, your program, and your mindset. The Hoop Heads Mentorship Program delivers mentoring services to basketball coaches at all levels through our team of experienced head coaches. Find out more at hoopheadspod.com or shoot me an email directly, mike@hoopheadspod.com. Our roster of shows is growing, so don't forget to check out all our other podcasts on the Hoop Heads Pod Network, including Thrive with Trevor Huffman, Beyond the Ball, the CoachMaze.com podcast, Players Court, Bleachers and Boards, and our team-focused NBA podcasts, Cavaliers Central, Grizz and Grind, Knuck If You Buck, The 305 Culture, Blazing the Path, and #Lakers. We're looking for more NBA podcasters interested in hosting their own show centered on a particular team. Email us at info@hoopheadspod.com if you're interested in learning more and bringing your talent to our network. Grab a pen and paper so you can take some notes as you listen to this episode with Adam Bradley, host of the Hardwood Hustle and founder of Lead 'em Up. Hello and welcome to the Hoop Heads Podcast. It's Mike Klinzing here with my co-host Jason Sunkel. And tonight we are pleased to welcome from the Hardwood Hustle, from Lead 'em Up, Adam Bradley. Adam, welcome to the Hoop Heads Pod.
Mike and Jason, appreciate it. Appreciate the invitation. Looking forward to jumping into some conversation here.
Absolutely. We are very excited to have you on, get a chance to talk to you about all the things that you've been able to do in the basketball world, in the podcasting world, in the entrepreneurial world, the leadership world. You've had a hand in a lot of different things. So let's start out by kind of giving people your background as a sports person. Tell us a little bit about your upbringing in the world of sports.
Yeah, I think I'm like most people, where my passion and love for sports was better than my talent. You know what I mean, Mike?
I do.
Not saying personally,
No, I know what you mean. I know what you mean, though. Hey, I thought I was going to make it to the NBA, so my talent came up a little bit short.
But, I always love sports, love competition, love, just as a fan watching sports. My athletic career was very moderate, high school, enjoyed all that, and didn't really do too much, but always wanted and dreamed about staying connected to sports. I always just felt like that could be a cool way to operate, a cool way to live, just being around teams, being around competition. And it's so beautiful what sports allows you to just kind of be a part of. So I always wanted to be a part of it. So, I always had that passion. It just didn't play out for me from a playing perspective.
So what did that look like for you when you started thinking about, okay, it's time for me to get out into the real world. My athletic career as a player, other than maybe playing in some men's leagues, is over. What is it that I want to do? Just what was your thought process in terms of where you thought you might end up as a career?
Yeah, I think like most people that are sports fans, they have this vision of just being part of sports. But the reality is the opportunities are limited. Right? A lot of times the pay, the compensation isn't always great because you have so many people willing to do it for free or willing to do it at very little in return just to be around it. So, I don't quite know what I expected. And I didn't know, and I remember back in 2000 and maybe 5, I remember going up to, I live right outside of DC and on the Maryland side. I remember traveling up to New York City to Madison Square Garden for the Sports and Entertainment Job Fair. And it was me and one other, and we drove up, and we just wanted to see what opportunity existed out there. And we were early 20s. We went up there, and there wasn't much. You know what I mean? There wasn't much out there. And
GM of the New York Knicks?
I would have taken a job with the New York Knicks. Even they didn't have anything. But, everything was very entry level. It was very minimal pay, if anything. I think the thought of being in sports sometimes is better than the reality from a working perspective. So, at that time, I pursued it just trying to live this dream that I didn't even have clarity on. Okay. And ended up not pursuing it. Ended up just jumping into sales and end up going the sales route. But then in 2008, I was able to kind of jump into a sports perspective, actually in the podcasting space. Ironically enough, 2008, which you're talking 12 years ago at this point, podcasting was really, really new. In fact, had to be introduced to people. Okay, just what the concept, what it even was. And 2008, a buddy of mine who was very innovative, very cutting edge, he had this podcast studio full of cameras and audios and mics and mixing boards. And that may seem common to today's world, but in 2008, it was like, holy smokes, what is this? And he invited me on. I had this charity golf event that I had hosted for many years, and it had turned into this big thing. And he wanted to do this interview, and he invited me over. And he had this little show with his buddies, and they were just doing this nightly show. And I came over and saw his setup and said, dude, this is amazing. This is incredible. End up pitching him maybe right then and there and said, hey, I'm a diehard Washington football team. I'll use that term now. All right, I'm a diehard Washington football team fan. I'm a diehard local DC sports fan. Can I host a sports show? You produce it. You manage all this technology I see in front of me. Let me be the personality. Let me lead it. Let me bring the people. Let me promote it. I'll build it. And together we'll do it. And we launched. We called ourselves the Ball Hogs. And long story short, Mike, over the first 2008, And it was in 2012. We went from this one single show called The Ball Hogs. There was 4 of us recording on Tuesday nights. Before you know it, 2 or 3 years later, we ended up having 10 shows on the network. We covered every one of the major pro teams in the Baltimore, Washington market: Ravens, Orioles, Wizards, Capitals, Nationals, MMA, University of Maryland, the whole gamut there. We had a full network. We had our own studio of 1,000 square feet that we recorded each night of the week, that all the shows could go to and do their show on different nights of the week. We had corporate sponsors, and we even signed a deal with Ted Leonsis, who owns the Washington Wizards and the Washington Capitals, who had his own online network at the time called Monumental Network. And in 2012, signed a deal with him and took our independent sites and migrated them onto his platform. And we were doing it, Mike. We were doing it. And at this point, we were credentialed with every team. We were covering the teams as media and making money. We all had still full-time jobs, but we were doing it from a side hustle perspective. And that is what allowed me to get into sports. Pretty cool how it played out.
Absolutely. So before your friend brought you to the podcast studio, had you had any awareness at all of podcasts?
I don't think I had. I really don't think. In 2008, I think I may have heard the concept once or twice, or the term, but I don't recall ever having listened to one, no.
Did you have a plan for ever turning it into a quote unquote real job or making some money? Or was it initially just, hey man, this is really cool to be able to sit in the studio and talk sports all night with my friends?
I never thought that far ahead, right? I'm very focused on the here and the now, and just trying to, I try not to like plan out too far in advance. So I don't think I thought that far. I think at first it was like, let's just have some fun, but I'm a builder. I'm a builder and creator. That's just part of me. So I knew I was going to build it. I didn't know what I was going to build it into, but I knew I was going to build it. I knew I was going to hustle. I knew I was going to grow. I was going to network. I was going to not be content with just doing it for the sake of doing it. I'm someone, if I'm going to do it, I'm like, oh, let's do it big, right? So I knew we were going to build it. I just didn't know what it would build into. So I wasn't quite sure.
Gotcha. When you sat down, were you the guy that went in and sat and talked with Ted Leonsis, or how did that process come to pass? Did he reach out to you? Did you reach out to him? Just explain to me how you got connected to him and how that eventually went down.
Yeah, that's a great question. So they were launching an online network, and I remember seeing a press release or like some PR piece coming out talking about they were building this online network that was going to be where the Wizards and the Capitals platforms lived, and they wanted to have collaborations with different sites and host them on the site and really create this like DC sports kind of home, right? So I'd read all that, and as I was reading it, it just clicked. I said, he needs us.
Right. We've already got this.
We've got 10 sites covered, and we are fan created, right? Fan hosted, fan created. We could be the fan voice, right? On his platform. We had great traffic. We had great branding here in the Baltimore, Washington market. So I ended up getting a friend who worked there at the time to make the introduction, planted the seed for me, gave me permission to email it over. I ended up emailing over a really kind of like a 10-slide deck of sorts of just who we were and what we did to see if they had interest in talking. They emailed back and said they did. And then we got on a call. We kind of told them our story, what we were all about. And then just naturally just kept talking, right? And then we ended up signing the deal. It was a 3-year deal and ended up migrating all of our platforms. And it was a big thing. And for me, although it didn't change anything we were doing on the day-to-day, perception-wise, it changed everything, right? And isn't that crazy how the world works sometimes, Mike?
It is.
It's almost like a fickle nature. It's like I'm not doing anything different today than I was a month ago, but now that Ted Leonsis or this major network has endorsed us and partnered, now all of a sudden people are like, wow, they're for real. And then that actually kind of launched, of sorts, my kind of entry into working with schools. Because after we signed that deal, I started getting asked to speak at different colleges and high schools about our story. They began to be intrigued with this. Man, y'all started this little show. You created this network. You've got your studio. You signed a deal. Tell us about it, right? And I started getting asked to go around speaking, and that eventually, I didn't connect the dots initially, but it ended up being what launched Lead 'em Up down the road. That came later though, but it helped the momentum there.
So were those speaking gigs people reaching out to you to talk about it from the entrepreneurship angle?
Exactly. Yeah. Just success, habits, building from an entrepreneurial perspective. That's exactly what it was.
Which one of those shows which one of the shows did you like the most when you had it, from thinking back to those original, whatever set of 10 that you created?
Well, so I hosted 2 of them. So I hosted the Ball Hogs, which was really the Washington football team, primarily with some other sports. And then I also hosted the Wizards. So I've always been a big basketball fan. That's always been the sport that I've really enjoyed. So there's nothing that's going to top the Ball Hogs, just because we had so many opportunities, that were so cool, experience-wise, broadcasting live draft parties at the stadium and stuff like that. It's hard to kind of top that. But I'd say the Wizards one was the first one that we got credentialed with. Obviously, once we became connected with Leonsis and Monumental, our access to the team elevated significantly. We had full access. We had greater access with the Wizards than we did with any of the other teams. So I think from that perspective, that made it really cool that we could just go and be at practice and be at games and just walk around and get to know, just be there. You know what I mean?
Right. At that point, are you still working your full-time sales job?
Still working the full-time sales job at that point. Yep.
Gotcha. All right. So at the end of that 3-year contract, what happens?
Well, so towards the end of that contract, I ended up getting connected with Alan. So for those that don't know, Alan Stein, my original co-host on the Hardwood Hustle. I'd say with about a year left into the contract, or some point maybe midway through my Monumental contract, I also had a third business called Simply Fresh, where myself and my partner on the podcast network, the tech guy, all right, he's a genius. He can build websites and mobile apps, and that's what allowed us to have 10 websites. And while I built kind of the marketing and did all that on the front of it, he was kind of that brains behind the scenes of the podcast network. So he and I launched a company called Simply Fresh, because people were coming to us during all of this, just impressed with our branding, impressed with our web platform, impressed with what we had built. And we were building a nice audience that we were like, wow, we could actually promote this and make some money building websites and apps. And I'll manage the front end. You do the building. I'll do the sales. And we started launching that. So at that point, I had 3 things going on. I had my sales. I had the podcast network. And then we had Simply Fresh. Well, Alan Stein, who most know in the basketball community, he reached out at one point and asked if we would build some websites and an app for him. And he had known us because he was on the ball. We had him on as a guest a year or 2 prior on the Ball Hog show, just because he was a local individual who was growing. And we did a profile and spotlight on him. And he and I developed a friendship during that. So he reached out and we built this website. And he said, I need 2 sites built. This was back when he had Stronger Team.
Right.
He needed a Stronger Team, and he needed Stronger Team Nation. His nation was when he was going to get trainers kind of under him. And he also wanted a mobile app built. So we started working together and building it. And this was probably in 2013 maybe. And I met him. I had him meet me at the studio one day. And I started pitching him on this idea of a podcast. Because I'm looking, I'm kind of like consulting with him and looking at his business, looking at all that he does, looking at his audience size. I was kind of looking at the landscape of where podcasts were. Saw that he had this successful YouTube channel. And I'm like, Alan, do you know about podcasts? And he didn't really. He knew a little bit about it, but not like, he didn't really know about it. Okay. And I'm like, Alan, dude, man, you got this audience. You've got this platform. I've got this studio. Man, we should do a show together. And I said, I've been covering the Wizards. I've been doing all this public speaking with schools from like a leadership, entrepreneurial perspective. I could be the fan, I could be the media guy, I could be the leadership guy while you're the coach, right? So we have this nice balance of a yin and a yang. We should do it. And he loved the idea. And then especially when he came to the studio and he saw all that we did, he was like, man, this is sweet. Let's do it. So we ended up launching the Hardwood Hustle. So that was with about a year left in my monumental contract that we launched the Hardwood Hustle. And I'll be honest with you, it absolutely took off. It absolutely took off. And, Alan's a hustler. I'm a hustler. We had a great product. As we joked about before we started recording, we were kind of the first platform that could really help coaches like this, that could really provide inspiration and guidance and just developmental resource for them. So it just took off. We had great sponsors. And while that was growing, I started realizing like, wow, I'm really passionate about not sports talk anymore. I'm more passionate about like impacting people. And so then I ended up just starting to have a real heart shift into more like impacting people through this platform. At the same time, I was doing more speaking, and Lead 'em Up was starting to get going a little bit. I got asked by one school that I spoke at if I would be willing to be their leadership coach. We had no direction and guidance, Mike, of what that would look like. But the head coach said, or the coaching staff said, we just want you around every week. I'll give you the kids 1 hour every week. I feel like you could impact them. They listen to you. That you have a way to connect with them. Is there a way you could do it? And so I ended up doing it. And that's where that first team was. It was at a school, Watkins Mill High School, actually where Alan and I went. It was with their varsity football program. And every Tuesday from 5 to 6, I was given all 50 kids to spend an hour to pour into them, and really just loved every minute of it. Spent so much time around the team that year to do everything I can to pour into them and impact them and build them and grow them. And I realized I had to have relationships in order to do that, and they had to really trust me. So it really became like I was all in. So between that starting to build and between the Hardwood Hustle taking off and the heart shift, I ended up going back to my network guys and saying, I wanted to sell my piece out. I wasn't interested in renewing it. I wanted to do everything I can to set them up for success because some of those guys still wanted to do it. So I ended up kind of helping them continue it. And then I ended up getting out and then focusing on Lead 'em Up and Hardwood Hustle. So that's how that transition.
Yeah. So are those guys still, is anybody that was involved in that original group still doing what you guys started?
Not as a full network. So I'd say there are 3 of the platforms out of the 10 that are still active and live. I believe the Baltimore Ravens one is.
Okay.
I believe the Washington Wizards one is. And I believe the Baltimore Orioles site still is. But they're independent now. They didn't renew.
Gotcha.
I communicated to the Leonsis that I wasn't going to renew the agreement there. So.
Gotcha. All right. So when you and Alan get hooked up and you start the Hardwood Hustle and you said it blows up, tell me what that looks like in terms of how quickly did you guys know, oh man, this thing is going to take off? Was it 2 episodes in? Was it 5 episodes in? And then what does blowing up look like in terms of how did you know? Were you getting feedback? Was it the numbers that you were seeing? Just describe what that process looked like.
Yeah. So there's a lot, right? There was a lot of things that were pointing to the direction that it was blowing up. Obviously, social feedback, that's one, right? You certainly can get a true read of how you're doing based on the engagement of social, right? You put an episode out, does it go kind of along with crickets in return, or is there like tremendous feedback, right? And we were just getting great feedback. So that was certainly encouraging. We actually lined up 4 sponsors before we started recording, which was a really unique thing because of the fact that we didn't really have a platform to, sell on, right? We couldn't say we've been doing this for a month. Look at all we have, right? But we found 4 sponsors. We lined them up. We painted the vision, and they were on board with us. And one of the things that really helped us was that each of the four, because we were so new, it essentially became their podcast also, which was a huge, huge value add. So they each, all four of them, promoted it as if it was theirs. In addition, we strategically coordinated the sponsorships in ways that it was organic and integrated. So they actually had pieces on our show where they added content. So they actually had a piece of it, and they felt like they had a piece of it. We weren't just doing a commercial read. They were reading and submitting reads to us. And, for example, Better Basketball at the end did a full timeout where they did 2 minutes of whatever they wanted, and they actually submitted it. PGC Basketball did our halftime inspiration, and they could pour in, and they submitted that content. Team Snap did a training tip. So we had all this content. So we jump in, right? And we've got 4 sponsors, 1 paying us. So we already feel good about that. Okay.
Absolutely.
2, they are promoting it as if it's their own. 3, you've got Alan and I promoting it. And Alan at this time had a much bigger audience. So he's promoting, obviously that's driving a lot of it. We're getting the feedback, and then just naturally my mindset, Alan's mindset is just like, let's go, right? How can we build? How can we do it better? How can we keep growing? All of a sudden, we go down to Carolina and we spend the day at Jay Billis's house and record some episodes down there, right? We go up to ESPN and record with Jay Williams up at Bristol. We go to Dallas and spend the day with Mark Cuban. And it was just constantly like, who can we get next? What should we go to next? How should we do it? Oh man, we got Mark Cuban. We got to hype it. What do we want to do from a marketing to really hype this up and build energy? And all of a sudden we're just realizing, we're like, wow, man, this is really going. This is really, really happening. And our audience is getting bigger. And, and then we'd be at places where we'd be at the NABC at the Final Four. We'd be at a coaching clinic and coaches would just be coming up to us and saying, hey, man, I love the hustle, man. I listen to it every day. And, just like you said, Mike, we'd have parents say like, oh, man, I have my kid listen to it. We listen to it together. We'd have coaches say, hey, I'm listening to it in the car with my athletes on the way home from practice rather than just sitting there fairly silent. We listen to the hustle. And I think at that point, you begin to see, you're like, wow, we're onto something, right? This is really, really special. And it just kept fueling us to keep growing.
Was it ever strange? I think one of the things that I found, especially the first time I met Alan in person, after having listened to so many of your guys' episodes, and again, doing it, as I said before the podcast, like my son and I used to listen to it on the way to AAU games. And so we kind of felt like we got to know you and Alan. And then when I got a chance to actually meet Alan in person, he obviously didn't know me other than a couple phone conversations and some email exchanges. But I felt like because I had listened to so many episodes, I knew about him and I knew about his kids and I kind of knew about his life, and I felt like I knew him. And that's kind of a weird sensation. I think it's one of the strengths of podcasting is that it's a really intimate medium for being able to interact with people, because if somebody's a regular listener of your podcast, especially when clearly most of the time you're on topic and you're talking about whatever it is, or you're interviewing a guest, but there are certainly times where you're talking about your own life or things that are going on, and then people feel like they get to know you. And I know that was a strange sensation for me when I first met Alan, because I felt like I know him, but he doesn't really know me from anybody else. So did you ever experience anything like that on your end of it, when people would come up to you and be like, hey, Adam, like they were your long lost friend?
Yeah, I mean, thankfully it happened quite frequently, which was pretty awesome, right? And humbling. And I think those few times that it happens, I think that just feeds to what we were talking about, just recognizing we're onto something, And I mean, obviously Alan got a lot more attention than I did, right? I was fairly new into the basketball space, into the coaching space, whereas he'd kind of been going. So he certainly was a lot more receiving of the attention, which was fine, totally good. But yeah, I mean, that definitely happened, and it definitely takes you back a little bit. I think in those moments when it happens, my mind just goes to the other side of like trying to make sure the other person feels comfortable.
For sure.
Right? Because it can get a little awkward because they're like, oh, hey, yeah. Hey, congrats on the birth of your daughter, And I'm like, I can see where it can get awkward, right? And I just try to make them feel better, be like, man, just, hey, thank you so much. Hey, tell me about you, right? And like, just quickly just go back to them. So that would be my approach at the time.
Do you know where to hit the backboard for the highest percentage shots? Do you know when using the backboard is better than taking a direct shot? Be certain that you are taking the highest percentage shots by training with the Shoticle. The Shoticle mounts on your backboard to give you the location of the highest percentage shots. Train with the Shoticle, and you will score more. Basketball is a data-driven game, so don't ignore the data and the facts. We worry about the data so you can focus on shooting. Visit Shoticle.com now and start scoring more. When you guys started, did you have an end goal in mind in terms of what you thought you wanted to do with the platform? Was there anything that you thought like a year or two out, hey man, if we can get to this point, we're going to be able to do X, Y, or Z? Or was it more just a case of we want to just keep growing it and kind of see where it takes us?
Yeah, I think for both the Hustle and for the original network, my sports network, I think you just go and you just keep growing and just wait and see where it's going to take you, right? I think the medium of podcasts at that time, both with the Hustle and the network, it was still uncharted territory. So we weren't quite sure where it could go. We didn't know what the potential could be, right? Now you look around, you see podcast networks is such a big business. Well, at the time, it didn't look that way. So we didn't quite know. We had some conversations at times about, do we try to pitch it to an ESPN? Do we try to pitch it to a Bill Simmons or something like that? Then you just start kind of facing the predicament of like losing intellectual property, losing control of the show. And then you've got to start weighing the pros and cons. Like, is the pro and the benefit of joining one of these other groups, is it really that great, right? Is the financial benefit that great? Is the audience growth that much greater in exchange for lack of control or having to be managed or not having the freedom and autonomy to do what we want? So, we experimented a lot. We tried a subscription-based thing for a period of time. We called it the 110% Club.
I remember that.
Yeah, and we said we would do extra content and we do coaches notes and we'd record extra episodes. We wanted to see if, because that was one thing we wrestled with a lot too. Do we just leave it open,
right,
for all, right, or do we bring it in-house and make it some type of subscription base and really serve more intimately a smaller community as we try to monetize it that way? And we did okay with the 110% Club, but not enough to get us to switch.
Right? I think it's hard. I think it's hard to transition from free to paid. I think that's really tough, especially when you look at clearly from when you guys started. Podcasting's continued to grow. I mean, week by week since you started, there's been more and more people in the space. And when more and more of it is free, it becomes more and more difficult, I think, to turn it into a subscription. Again, unless you're talking about being part of, as you said, a big conglomerate of ESPN or some other big podcast network where maybe then because of the volume of listeners that those things can generate, then maybe you can pull it off. But it just seems like once you're in a free medium to turn around and have it become paid, it seems like you'd have to really execute that almost flawlessly in order to get that to happen.
Yeah, and we gave ourselves 6 months that we were going to go all in 6 months. We were going to give it a true shot and then just evaluate it. And like I said, we had subscribers to it. It's not that we didn't. We just, after 6 months, we came to the conclusion of, one, we didn't have enough subscribers to warrant the extra work, to truly justify the extra work. And secondly, it just kind of revealed itself and became more clear that we didn't want to move away from the reach, right? Because you go into a subscription, now all of a sudden we're limiting our audience reach. And the more we thought about it and talked about it, we wanted to impact. And the greater impact is when you offer it free. So we then moved away from it at that. And honestly, I think naturally you should experiment, and when we experimented with that idea, I'll be honest, there was a local podcaster here in the Maryland, DC, Virginia area that had a subscription model, and he had this tight-knit community of paid subscribers that were so loyal. And I remember being introduced to his business model, and that's what intrigued it. And I remember going to Alan and saying, listen, this could be something. And you just don't know, right, until you try it and to give it a shot. And we did. And I'm glad we did, but it just wasn't the right fit for us.
Yeah, absolutely. I think anything that you try, you end up learning lessons. And if you take advantage of those lessons, it can lead you into the next thing that you're going to do, whatever that may be. And you continue to grow and experience things. And that's what allows you to have future success. So when you think about the start of Lead 'em Up and going back to your high school, and they ask you, hey, we want you to come in and spend an hour every week with the team. And obviously at that point, you don't have a curriculum created. You don't really have anything. So clearly you just nod your head at that point and say, yes, I'm going to do it, and then figure it out as you go. So talk about how that experience sort of led you into the creation of Lead 'em Up.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right on how it played out, right? You agree to it and you figure it out. And that's what it was, right? They asked if I would do it. I was intrigued with it because I hadn't thought about that before. I love people. Like that's the first thing, right? I love people and I love impacting people and building people up and leading people. I mean, that's just kind of how I've always been wired. And the thought of being able to work with this team in that regard and have freedom to do it was cool. And the schedule worked out. So I said, let's do it. But the figuring out process came by literally becoming so connected to this team and just entrenching myself into this team that entire season. I needed to know what they were struggling with. I needed to know the challenges. I needed to understand the dynamics. I needed to understand the family issues that was causing certain things with the players. I needed to know about the internal beefs on the team, right? The cliques. I needed to know it all. And in that year, I just spent every week with them. And I mean, my time was Tuesday from 5 to 6, but I was at games. I was showing up on days I wasn't. I was texting them all. I was taking some of them out to eat. I was driving some of them home, just doing anything. I was reaching into my contacts that I had built over the years with the network to try to do additional things. I remember I had Allen out there one day working them out. I had some Washington Redskins come out and do a workout. I had some swag because I had a relationship with this vendor, and I hooked them all up with not thigh pads, but like the girdles where the thigh pads slide in or are already built in, something like that, and with gloves. I remember I just wanted to serve them. I wanted to love them, right? But during that process, you begin to see what they are challenged with. And each Tuesday, I'd sit there and I'd say, all right, this one I got to talk about this. We've got to discuss this. But I've got to do it in a way that will engage them. I've got to figure that out. And that's where I'd sit there and would just brainstorm and try to figure out how could I create the illustration or a metaphor or an activity or an exercise that would get them locked in and all around it. And as I would do that, I was just thankful that God's kind of wired my mind to be that type of like creative thinker, I guess, right? Where these ideas and these concepts and these themes come to me, right? And I also think there's a lot of truth to that which you look for, you will find. If you've ever heard that quote, I was looking for things also, right? I was looking for engaging thoughts and metaphors. And when you start looking for it, it presents itself in many cases. So I was journaling everything I did that year, Mike, with the team. I journaled every exercise. I'd drive home after the exercise and after my time with them, and I'd critique myself and say, do I feel like I moved them? Was that cheesy? Was that impactful? Was it powerful? I'd ask the kids, hey, what did y'all think about last Tuesday? Oh, that was good, man. That was good. That really hit me. And I just was building. And that's where the momentum of that year started playing out.
Okay, question number one. I've got two. So the first one is, did you know as you were going through that this was a business opportunity, or was it just a really cool opportunity to have an impact on those kids? So that's question number one. And then question number two is, how much of it did you go into feeling like you had a handle on what you wanted to teach them, and how much of it was week to week gaining their trust, figuring out what was going on within the team, and adjusting from there? So in other words, going into it, did you think there's 6 things that I want to hit over these next 6 sessions? Or was it, I'm going to hit this in the first session and kind of see what's going on with the team and then adjust from there?
Well, let's answer the second one. I had no plan. It was a complete read the team, see the situation week by week. And so, yeah, I had no plan. I had no content. I had no curriculum. I was week by week. The second thing, very similar to the podcast. I've always been a builder. I've always been a creator. I don't want to do anything small, right? I always want to go big. It can drive my wife crazy, right? Like a neighborhood cookout can't just be 3 families. It's got to be the whole neighborhood. Like that's just
you're shutting down the block, huh?
We're shutting down the block. We're going to make it a thing. I'm going to create flyers and put them on the mailboxes. Like that's just how I go. And same deal here, right? I don't think I knew what it looked like, but a couple weeks in, as I'm going, and I'm hearing the feedback and I'm seeing the coaches really enjoy it and talk about, man, this has been so good for our team. All of a sudden, there goes the ideas. The ideas start coming, right? Like, wow, if this is good for this team, it's got to be good for that team. It's got to be good for this team. And then once again, the Hardwood Hustle is happening at the same time. I'm talking now about the things I'm doing with this team on the show, which is now generating feedback and inquiries from our audience. Hey, I hear you talk on the show about doing these activities and working with this team and this exercise. What is it you're doing? Is there a chance I could get access to it? And then all of a sudden, you get a few of those. You get some positive feedback of what you're doing. You start getting some local coaches asking about it because they're seeing it on social and it seems different and it feels different. And it doesn't take many inquiries to trigger an idea that I may be onto something. I don't know that exact number, if it's 5, 10, 50, but it doesn't take a lot. Okay.
Right. Yep.
And then just as I just kept going, I kept thinking about it also in a concept of Alan would talk on the show about when he graduated Elon and he went back and started training, that there was this void with the sports programs at the time that nobody had strength and conditioning. It was like a foreign concept. He shared this story many times on the episodes about him writing letters to Stu Vetter at Montrose Christian, right? Hey, let me work out your players. Let me work out your team. I'll do it for free. Okay. And he talked about that all the time because I forget what year he graduated college, but we're talking probably late 90s that this is all happening, but nobody had strength and conditioning coaches. It was void. But now that's not the case. Everybody has it, right? And he talked about how he kind of pioneered that in many ways. And I started thinking about that as it related to leadership. I started thinking about, this is interesting. Every coach I meet talks about the importance of leadership and character in their program. But the more coaches I'm around, the more I see that nobody has a program. This is crazy. And then I start connecting the dots. I'm like, could I be someone who initiates a transition of leadership programs with sports teams the way Alan did with strength and conditioning with sports teams, specifically at the high school level? And then as those dots keep all coming together, right? Inquiries coming in, positive feedback, ideas, the natural mindset of being a builder and a creator and a go-getter. That's when I start thinking, okay, I could be onto something. I've got to figure out though how to scale it, how I can replicate myself, right? Because I don't want to be someone that's just simply trading dollars for hours. I can only be so much. I have another job. I've got a wife, I've got a kid. So that's when the digital curriculum thought started playing out. Why don't I just take what I'm doing, put it down, and basically transfer thought and give permission to other people to use it through a digital curriculum of Lead 'em Up.
Did you have in mind at that time, obviously that is and was a great idea to be able to put that curriculum online to allow people to access it. Did you have a thought that you would eventually have people who would be, I'm going to use the word understudies of you, that they would go out and do the same things that you had done at Watkins Mill? They would do them at schools and in person for people who are looking for, rather than if I'm a high school varsity basketball coach and I can get the curriculum and look at it and I can try to teach it to my players myself, maybe it would be more impactful if somebody from the outside comes in and it's a different voice, and there's obviously benefits to that. Did you see that piece of it at first, or did you just see the digital, let's put the curriculum online?
I'd say yes and no. I saw it, but I didn't see it to the point where I was pursuing it. And the reason I say that is, so when we launched Lead 'em Up, one of the big things that helped us when we first launched is that we signed a partnership with a group down in Florida called Game On Nation. Game On Nation is ran by a guy named Steve Shenbaum, him, Blair Bloomstein, AJ Lee. They've got a great team, Chris Friday. And they essentially have a leadership program of sorts. It's a little different of a vibe. It's game-based, so it's really fun, dynamic games. And they work with corporate, high-level collegiate, and pro teams. And I got introduced to Steve. We had him on the Hardwood Hustle. And then he and I were speaking at a conference in Texas together where we continued kind of just getting to know each other. And the timing of this was really interesting. He was working pro collegiate, high-level collegiate, and corporate with his program. I got introduced to a few of his exercises and concepts on the podcast when we had him on. That's when I really began to learn and then studied him a little bit more and began to see what he did. And I realized that they were doing what you just alluded to, Mike. They had their team of trainers, and they'd go and work with pro teams or college teams, Calipari and stuff like that. And he also, not only did he have him, but he also had a team of regional coaches that would also go around. He obviously did the larger jobs and maybe the more high profile, but he had a team that went around and did it. So that thought was always there as I watched his business. But initially, he wasn't doing anything in the high school space, and he wasn't doing anything digitally. It was all in person. So I ended up pitching him on my vision of what I was building with Lead 'em Up, and told him that I wanted his curriculum, if I could license his curriculum, include it in what I had already built. Now, keep in mind, I had journaled everything I did with that year one at Watkins Mill. But I'll be honest, the curriculum wasn't extremely rich at that time. It was fairly new. Where our curriculum is today after 5 years, oh my gosh, night and day. But year one, it was still fairly new. It was in an infancy stage. So one of the things I really wanted and felt like we needed was another anchor into the curriculum where if people bought, there was more substance, more content. So I pitched him on that idea. He loved it. He wasn't doing digital. I was pitching him strictly as digital, and that's all we had in mind at the time, that I was going to keep working my local region in person, but for the most part, how could we reach the country? It was through digital. And he wasn't serving high school, so there was no overlap or conflict there. And we signed a deal. We signed it was either a 2 or 3 year deal, I forget, but it was huge. So that allowed me this insight into what he was doing, which gave me the thought that of one-day regional coaches, but I wasn't really thinking because that's not what we were doing at the time. What happened, though, after a couple years of digital, I began to realize that if Lead 'em Up was truly going to grow where I thought and wanted it to grow, it couldn't just live digitally. Because of what you just alluded to, Mike, about coaches, yes, they could access it, but there is still a large number of coaches that even though it may be less expensive to buy it online, they could do it themselves. They just don't want to. Maybe it's not their personality. Maybe it's not their style. Maybe they're too busy with other things, but they would pay gladly to have someone come in. And I began to realize, like, if we're going to get Lead 'em Up, we've got to shift our business model and start doing more live training and all that. And at that point, our curriculum had grown. where I felt like it could stand alone. So we didn't renew the agreement with Game On after that. But then that's when it started positioning into the regional coaches. Now we've got seven of them around the country. I think you had two of them on a past show,
Absolutely.
Steve and Kyle.
Yep.
Aren't those guys rock stars?
Great guys, man. They're awesome. They were fantastic.
So, I mean, that's, once again, not really knowing, but just day by day, right? Little by little, things begin to reveal themselves.
Absolutely. All right. So let's talk specifics of leadership, some of the things that you believe in as a leader. So if I'm a high school basketball coach in this case, what are some things, without giving away your entire curriculum, what are some things that you feel like from a leadership standpoint, every coach should be engaging with their players when it comes to that particular topic of leadership?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big topic, right? There's a lot of different ways to go on that. I think, I think the first thing, especially in the high school age, let's just stick there, right? We've got to get to this point where we shift what's perceived as cool within the team. Okay. We've got to get to the point where we get rid of that cool factor, and it penetrates and permeates through majority of programs out there. There is this need and addiction to kind of do what's cool, and it interferes with leadership, and it interferes with building a healthy environment that produces winning. So for me, that's one of the big things is to try to fight through that. And there's a variety of ways you can help do that. But as you know, Mike, being around sports, that's a big issue, right? That's a big, big problem.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So that's one of the things, because I think until we've got to get an open mind from the players, they've got to embrace this. So that's one of the things I think we differentiate ourselves significantly is I just think our leadership program hits differently. And what I mean by that is I think there's a lot of good content. I think there's a lot of good leadership coaches out there, a lot of good leadership organizations out there, and not to knock them all. I think they're incredible. I think their heart's in the right place. I think they are, their mindsets are where they need to be. I just think we've done an incredible job speaking in a way and teaching in a way that kids learn and they want to learn. So I know that doesn't answer your question, but I'd say here's a couple of the concepts we talk a lot about. And I'll give one that's different, that a lot of coaches might not be thinking of. We talk a lot about a topic called followership. So most coaches are accustomed naturally to speaking about leadership. We always talk about leaders needing to step up, and that is absolutely the case. We need leaders to step up. We need leaders to lead us and move us forward. Absolutely. But I don't think we spend enough time talking about the followers, because you can have the most passionate, good-hearted, committed leader, but if they're trying to lead a group of people that don't want to be led or want to make the job of the leader difficult and challenging, we're not going to get where we need to go. We've got to talk about how we perform as follower, and we call it followership. It's a phrase that we've coined within Lead 'em Up. And it all builds on this theme that what we call rotational leadership. We believe on every single team that you have both leaders and followers, that every single person on your team plays both roles. They play the leader role and the follower role. In fact, they rotate. It's a constant rotation. Day by day, hour by hour, minute by minute. 1 minute you're leading, next minute you're following. 1 minute you're leading, next minute you're following. 1 minute you're leading, next minute you're following. And that's for everyone, even the best leader on the team. There are moments where they lead, and then a moment later they're following, right? Because of that, they've got to perform at a high level in both areas. And this is a different concept that a lot of people don't talk about. So we spend a significant amount of time. In fact, we just released a 4-part exercise series to develop followers, because we believe if you can build the followers, in turn, it strengthens the leader, because a great follower is a leader's best friend. And when you've got great followers, you will see greater performance and greater commitment out of the leader. Because poor followers, or quote unquote unhealthy followers, they burn out our leaders. In most cases, our leaders get burned out by our own teammates, and it's a sad tragedy.
It really is, yep.
But so we teach a lot about that. So that's one concept in particular that we think has had a huge impact on creating that environment that we believe creates, winning. And we call that a green environment. We do everything around this theme called the green team. We want kids to be green, build green. We've got this whole exercise concept that breaks down the green, the grays, the reds. It's pretty cool and dynamic. 7 rules that it takes to build a green team. And the kids just get all in and they understand it. And green represents money. And before you know, we're trying to be money, and it's the money team, and the kids are buying in and they're flashing dollar signs, after practice, but it's not what you think it is. It's us trying to be money from a leadership and character perspective. So that's a little bit of how we've tried to flip it in a way that kids actually want to, view it differently.
Yeah, making it fun. Making it fun, exactly. So they want to participate. So I think to go along with that, Adam, I have a question for you, and that is, I think in order for any of this to work, especially when you're going to bring in an outside voice, it would seem to me that the first step that would need to take place is you have to be able to get those kids on that team to be able to trust you and trust that you have their best interest at heart. So what do you personally do to help earn their trust? And then with the guys that are your regional lead 'em up guys, how do you train them, or what do you talk to them about in terms of building trust with the kids that you're in front of? So the first time you walk into that room, they don't know you at all. And so they're not going to open up, I'm sure, the way you need them to open up in order to accomplish the things that you just described. So how do you make them trust you? How do you get them to trust you and open up?
It's a great question. I'll be honest with you. I think in many regards, this is one of the most difficult things to teach, because I think it naturally comes out through your personality, naturally comes out through your character. I think like us as adults, we're able to read people. Even people that have very low emotional intelligence still can feel when something doesn't feel right with another person, right? Think about your own life, Mike. Those people you interact with where it just feels a little different. And it's not that they did anything, you just didn't get the same feeling that you did around this person. And that's very hard to teach. I think some people are just kind of gifted with it. I think just some people have a personality and a charisma and a attitude and a vibe to them that is welcoming. It's warm. It feels trustworthy. So from that regard, I think there's some coaches that have it greater than others and others don't. So I think a little bit of that goes into the hiring process.
Yep, for
more
sure.
So than the training process.
Absolutely.
So can I bring on regional coaches that just kind of have it, right? People that I've met along the way that I am in love with their character, I'm in love with their heart, and I've gotten a vibe from them that they just, man, they're easy to talk to. You just trust them. You just really believe them. They're not rigid. They're not cold. They're not standoffish. They don't seem like they have a barrier. So I think that's one dynamic. But as it relates to trying to teach it, it's going to be important that we go in those moments with an incredible sense of humility, right? And appreciation. So at least for me, when I start week 1, prior to me jumping into our first exercise, I'm communicating to them a couple things. I'm communicating to them how thankful and appreciative of the opportunity to be with them this season that I am. I want them to know I'm excited for it. I'm thankful for it. I'm appreciative of Coach bringing me in. I look forward to helping play a part in this. So I certainly communicate a thankfulness and appreciation for it. And then the second is a humility. I don't want to come in there and make it seem like I'm going to fix everything, that I'm going to be this magic man that's going to turn this team around. Do I believe I can? Yes, but that's not what I'm going to portray to them. I'm going to portray that like, hey, this is going to be a fun journey that we're going to go on. And I'm excited to do it with you guys. I don't know exactly how it's going to look, but I do believe if you all lean in on this, that it's going to be really helpful. And I don't think that it's going to, lead them up alone or me, that I'm going to do some type of magic. It's going to be all of us working together. And guys, if y'all are up to building something really special, I'd like to do that with you. You guys up for that? right? And just simply kind of presenting it in a way where you're appreciative and trying to communicate humility. You don't want to go in there and just be like, all right, they hired me, like I'm the man. You can't go that way.
Understood. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think what you said right off the top of hiring for that trustworthy feel is probably the most important ingredient. And for you as the head of the organization to be able to sit down with those people and get a feel for who they are and what they are, and know that when they get in front of an audience that they're going to give off that trustworthy vibe and they're going to be able to build that rapport with the kids that they're in front of. To me, that seems like it's the most important thing. And then you back that up with what you just described, with the way you train them and the way you talk about coming in there humble and not saying that you're going to have all the answers, but instead, I'm here to work with you. I'm here to help you. Now, my next question is going to kind of piggyback off that, but it's going to take it in not a different direction, but so here's the question. Let me just ask it. The question is, give us the most transformative story that you've been a part of, whether it was interaction between teammates or with an entire team. What's the most impactful thing that you've seen happen, or maybe inspirational thing you've seen happen with a team or with a group of players as part of Lead 'em Up?
Oh man, I don't like this question, Mike. and the reason I don't like this question is I don't know how to answer it humbly, right? Because and I don't like boasting about it, but we've got so many. We've got so many stories.
Can you generalize it? Like, give me a general, like, I know there's probably been similar issues on teams that you've worked with and that you've been able to help the team work their way through it. So maybe pick a topic or something that is somewhat common that you can share.
Yeah, I mean, I think the most common is the year-to-year transformation that players experience. So when they look at like this team this year, what has been experienced and what we're doing this year, and they compare it to the year before, it's like night and day, right? And I mean, I had a player just the other day DM me. We were talking and we were engaged. They've been going through the Lead 'em Up program this year with the team, and their previous year's team just wasn't that healthy, right? They, it's almost like we're like a culture doctor, like a team culture doctor. Like the coach had to call the doctor in, right? Because their previous team was unhealthy, right? And we had to clean it up. And we've been going through the process just week after week of building, of creating this new environment, emphasizing the things that need to be emphasized, building momentum, getting people to be vulnerable and creating this really fun and enjoyable, safe place. And we finished up a session recently where the exercise required the players to do some things out of character, where I even posted this on Instagram. It's one of our most dynamic exercises. People absolutely love it when I show video of it, of teams doing this particular session. They think it's the coolest. And coaches are like, oh my gosh, that's incredible. But I shared in my Instagram story when I was sharing some highlights of it, I shared at the end that, hey, this is our most enjoyable, fun, game-changing exercise we have, arguably, in Lead 'em Up. Unfortunately, not all teams can experience it. Because the reality is, you better have a special environment with healthy leadership and even healthier followers to even be able to experience what you're seeing in the video. It's not for everybody. And it's why I actually do it late in my work with teams compared to early on, because most of the teams I work with could not do it early on. It would be a train wreck. It would be awkward. It would be uncomfortable. And after we did this, the player, and we're talking, this is a high-level collegiate athlete, messaged me and said, man, I just want to thank you for the work you've been doing with us this year. It's incredible. To be honest with you, what we did last week wouldn't even nearly happen, not even in the slightest bit, the year before. Our team couldn't have done it. And here we are doing it and loving it. So, I hear about stories like that. I see stories like that. It's just really hard to say. I mean, I will say our work with teams vary. Okay. So coaches can hire us in multiple different ways. They can hire us for a single session. They can hire us for 3 sessions throughout the season. But they also can hire us to be with them all season. And I can really tell you, the teams that hire us all season, I've got a Rolodex of stories and testimonials of just what has been created that I tell you what happens. And this is one of the best compliments that we get, Mike. We get compliments. When we get this one, when a player or a group of players go through Lead 'em Up on a team, and then they go into the next season and they go and jump onto another team, it's pretty remarkable to hear all the feedback we get about how much they don't enjoy their next team. That happens, Mike, all the time. Man, how's it going? Let's say they're jumping into, I don't know, lacrosse in the spring, How's it going? How's the season going? Man, I'll just be honest. It just doesn't feel the same as basketball in the winter. Man, I just love what we do there. I love Lead 'em Up. I love what it creates, what it produces. And, they jump into a program where the coach isn't intentionally trying to develop that environment, trying to develop that culture, those leaders, and it just feels so different. So I love that compliment. I'll be more specific. Do you have a more specific thought or request in mind?
No, I mean, I think when you're talking about that stuff, that's kind of what I'm envisioning and what I'm thinking about when I say transformative situations where you have a team that maybe is dysfunctional, or you have teammates that don't get together, or you have an experience for the kids in your program that isn't the experience that maybe they would want. And what I come back to, Adam, a lot of times is I think clearly as coaches, everybody wants to win games. I mean, everybody on Friday night likes to go home with a victory in their back pocket instead of a loss. But ultimately, especially at the high school level and below, it should be about much, much more than that. And I think that's what your program really is trying to do, is to have an impact on those young people so that 2 years from now, 3 years from now, 10 years from now, that program is still impacting them. And I think one of the things that as high school coaches, sometimes we take for granted or that we don't think about is what kind of experience am I giving the kids that are on my team? And I think that story that you just shared illustrates that clearly, where here you have the kid who said, hey, basketball season was awesome because we were doing lead 'em up and we were getting along and we had all this good culture stuff going. And now I jump over to the lacrosse team and that's not there anymore. And so my experience, and notice that kid didn't say anything about, you didn't mention in your story anything about the 1-loss record or how the team was doing or how much playing time the kid was getting. It was only about the experience of being on the team. And I think that's something that as high school coaches, again, in any sport, I think it's worth taking the time to evaluate your program and look at, is being a part of this program a positive experience for kids? And that doesn't mean that it's fun and games and goofiness every second. You can still demand that the kids work hard and you can still have a very high level of expectation. But I think the experience is so important. And I think what I hear you saying is that Lead 'em Up adds infinite value in terms of providing the kids that become a part of it and the teams become a part of it, that type of experience that they're always going to remember, that hopefully is going to have an impact on them for the rest of their lives. Is that kind of how you describe it?
No, I mean, I think that's well said, and I think the benefit from a coaching perspective is it increases performance, right? It raises your team ceiling. It gets, when you talked about standards there, it actually allows you to raise the standard and not have to fight the standard as frequent, because now you've got a group of players wanting to give it their all, right? Wanting to be all in. You're not having to get the buy-in, right? Because this is where they want to be. This is the best thing that they've experienced. And for me, I have a personal little challenge. I want, and I don't share this I don't think I've ever actually shared it.
All right, debut share right here on the Hoop Heads Pod.
Exclusive. So, you know how you the teams you've played on at a certain point or teams you've coached on, every coach, every player has those special years. And they always go back and reflect on them with great nostalgia. And they say, oh, man, that 2012, 2013 team, that was special, right? You always hear things like that where they reference these years.
For sure.
Right? You probably have them yourself. Okay?
Absolutely.
My own personal little game that I play in my own head, I want every team I work with that I take through Lead 'em Up, I want them to reflect back on that year as their number one year. As like, oh, man, that 2019, 2020 year, oh, that was just the best, man. I loved the group of guys, man. We were building something so special. It was fun. It was awesome. Like that's what I want. I want that year to be, I want the Lead 'em Up year. Let's say I only got a chance to work with the team one time. I want the Lead 'em Up year to be that year. And I would honestly say, I bet you could ask most athletes, they would say it. I had lunch with 3 guys that I had on this past basketball season last winter. And they were going away to college, and they, the 4 of us went out to eat. This was maybe like 3 months ago. That's all they talked about. That's all they talked about. They said, our 4 years in high school, we were with you. We had Lead 'em Up that last year. It changed everything, Coach. It changed everything, man. It was by far the best sports experience that I'd had. And these were multiple sport athletes. So you take multiple sport athletes over the course of 4 years in high school. They played on 8, 9, 10, 11, sometimes 12 teams, okay? And when they can walk away and say, without a doubt, my Lead 'em Up season on basketball my senior year was the best experience I had, that means something. But the positive is, from an on-court perspective, it usually means you get the best out of them. Okay, so there's a byproduct that is positive. Not only are you creating a great experience and developing leaders, but you're also getting better.
I think coaches have come around on that in the last 5 to 10 years, where I think if you look back 10 years ago, I think you would have got a lot of resistance and pushback from coaches that, oh, come on, man, that culture stuff, that leadership stuff, that's not really that important. They got to do.
Let me interject real quick.
Sure, go ahead.
I agree with you. It's still, I agree that they believe it. They still aren't at the point where they'll commit to it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think you get a lot less resistance when you have those kinds of conversations. There's a lot less of, I think back to like the Bobby Knight style of coaching and you're going to do it this way. Why am I going to do it that way? Well, because I said you're going to do it that way. And if you don't, you're not going to play, or you're not going to be on this team anymore. And thankfully that's gone away. But I do think that when you talk about culture and you talk about leadership, there's still, I think, some hesitancy in coaches, and it goes to kind of why people would want to bring in somebody from the outside. There's still a hesitancy, I think, on the part of coaches to take time away from their on-court or on-field activities, where they don't want to carve out that hour that you originally carved out at Watkins Mill to be able to do this type of thing, because coaches say, well, I could be working on 6 more plays out on the football field, or I could be working on special teams, or I could be working on our baseline out of bounds plays in basketball.
And you are absolutely right, Mike. And sorry to interrupt there.
No, you're good.
I just want to reiterate, you're absolutely right. And I tell you, those coaches that feel that way, let me tell you, I think TJ says this on the podcast a lot. You do the best with what you know, okay? I think in those cases, those coaches just don't know what it could truly look like.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's a great point.
They don't know what it truly could look like to have this environment that I was describing a few moments ago. They don't know what it could truly look like. They don't realize the buy-in, the commitment, the energy and fire and enthusiasm of what that could generate and become. I don't think they understand what the extra work, how much you'll see and how much you'll get out of the players. They just don't see it because they haven't experienced it maybe to that level. So they're not. So I try to look at them and interact with them with some grace, in the sense that, like, they're not doing it purposely. They just don't know. Okay. But the reality is, when you do become exposed to it, you can't go back. Right? Because now you've seen a new standard, in the program. You've seen the way a team operates when it's all in and everything's healthy. And you realize, like, holy smokes, I was missing so much. I can't go back now. So for us, that's part of our mission, right? We just got to keep fighting to make sure coaches truly recognize that, hey, when you do pour into your players, when you do intentionally spend time 30 minutes a week, in the classroom, working on your team, working on your leadership, working on followers and under all those different things, man, that is time you can't afford to waste because it always gets bumped. Leadership gets bumped by those who don't prioritize it enough. Okay, so when time gets tight, schedule gets cramped, what gets bumped? Leadership. You never get to see strength and conditioning get bumped. You never see skill training get bumped. It's always leadership by those who haven't fully recognized the power of it. Now, those that, on the flip side, there are many coaches that, that's not getting bumped. Like that absolutely is part of it. And I think those coaches they've seen some things and experienced it and they can't go back now.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right. I think once you take the time and see the impact it can have on your kids, and I think it's important to keep in mind, and you said it a couple times, that it's not only what I said in terms of providing a better experience, because all things being equal, coaches would probably like to provide their kids with a better experience if that better experience can continue to lead to wins on the scoreboard. And I think there's no doubt that there's a connection between having a team that is built around these leadership and character principles that you guys have put out there and winning and having us. Go ahead.
And here's another dynamic of why I think there's a lot of coaches that don't embrace it, right? I think a lot of coaches are still confusing good kids with good leaders. I've got good kids. I'm good. I'm
right.
Good.
Yep.
We've got good kids in our program. I don't need to spend that time as if it's like, as if a lead 'em up program is simply trying to keep kids out of these extremely negative situations. That's not the case. Yes, that is the case maybe in some instances, but good kids does not mean good leadership. We've got to make sure we're clear on that, coaches, right? You've got well-behaved, good-mannered kids. That's cool. That's a positive, right? I think that gives you a little bit of a head start. Okay, you don't have to get them, you don't have to pull them all the way from back there, but it doesn't mean that they're holding each other accountable well. It doesn't mean that they're showing up consistently with great energy and enthusiasm. It doesn't mean that they know how to communicate, right? It doesn't mean a lot of these things. Doesn't mean that they go out of the way to mentor an underclassman and bring them up. It doesn't mean that they know how to develop strong relationships within the group. Good kids does not mean good leadership. And there's still a lot of coaches out there that aren't embracing the leadership development because they think, I've got good kids, Mike. I'm good.
Yeah, that's true. I think that's really true. And there's a difference between being a good kid, as you said, and being a good leader and understanding what that looks like on the basketball court or on the football field or the soccer field, whatever it might be. I think if you have that in place and you are intentional about it, then I think you're going to end up getting far, far better results. And when you have somebody who, like yourself, has developed an expertise in this area, it becomes even more valuable sometimes than I kind of believe that you have that outside voice. Kids hear their coaching staff so much. It's kind of like being a parent. Your kids hear you so much on all these different things that sometimes sports is their way to get away from you at times. They just look, I'm tired of hearing your voice on every single thing in my life. I need to hear a different voice. And I think sometimes teams are like that too, that just the refresher of hearing somebody from the outside makes it better. I want to talk about another outside voice, Adam, and that is after you got a new co-host after Alan went a different direction. TJ came in. So just talk a little bit about what the chemistry has been like between you and TJ Rosine and just kind of where you guys are with the hustle. And then we'll talk a little bit more about that. We'll get back to the podcasting side of it for a second here.
Yeah. So, man, TJ's incredible. TJ, people are impressed with TJ with all that they see. Just know that he's doing about 5 times more than that unseen. Okay. And I think that just speaks to his character, right? people see the stuff with Key 5 and PGC and the hustle, but man, the amount of stuff he does to serve people, coaches, players that he never talks about is second to none. He doesn't toot his own horn. He really is the real deal. And, when he came on board to be the co-host, it was unexpected, actually. When Alan left to go kind of jump into, the new role that he was entering into, I was kind of, okay, I've got the platform, I get to hold on to it. Where do I go? And initially, I was actually going to have a co-host named Adam Harrington. Does that name ring a bell?
I remember. Yeah, I remember that. And then he got hired by an NBA team, correct?
Man, so he was going to be the co-host. We went out to Houston together during one of the Final Fours. He was doing individual pro training. He was getting hired by teams to come in and work with their athletes. So he was actually on like an assignment with the Houston Rockets at the time. And he was just independent. He was like an independent contractor per se, training. He'd spent the previous couple of years with KD, and now he's just kind of doing his own thing, working with different teams. I approached him about being a co-host because he and I had developed a really good friendship, and he was all in. And at that Final Four in Houston, he and I recorded all weekend. I flew out there. He was there. Man, we had Sam Decker. We had all these Rockets on the show. We recorded all these episodes. It was awesome, right? And I couldn't wait to launch it. And the night before, no joke, the night before we go to relaunch the podcast, we'd gone through the full rebrand and everything like that. He hits me up and he's like, "Hey man, we can't release any of the episodes." And I'm like, "What?" And he goes, "Yeah, I got hired by the Brooklyn Nets." I knew he was interviewing. We both didn't think it was going to happen anytime soon. We knew he was had his feelers out there. We thought it was going to be more towards the beginning of the NBA season. So I thought at the very least it would be like a 6-month co-hosting, but which would give me enough time to transition, right? To kind of get it back up and going. But yeah, man, he hit me up and said, "We can't release any of the episodes." I said, "You're kidding me." He's like, "No." He's like, "They won't let me," which makes sense, right? There's, you can't, if you're a coach on one team, you can't release interviews with players on another team. There's tampering issues, and a coach doesn't want, a team doesn't want their coach sharing all his secrets because he was sharing all his training secrets and stuff like that. So I get it. So yeah, so I was sitting there pretty discouraged actually at this point, really not sure what to do with the platform. I was, obviously I'd kind of worked through the transition of Alan leaving. Where do I go? Brought on Adam. Got all excited, and now Adam went. Now I'm like, man, what do I do? Right? Like, where do I go? Who's a candidate? I was thankful that after Alan left, there were a couple of sponsors and partners that wanted to stay on with me, which I was really excited about. Certainly humbled about. Team Snap wanted to stay on, as well as PGC. So I'd been staying in communication with those two in particular, and I made them aware that we were not going to be re-releasing any of the episodes we just recorded, and that Adam no longer was going to be the co-host. And as I shared that with PGC, I remember TJ called me right back, like after I shared that with him. And he just said, "Let me ask you a question. Have you thought of like who that co-host is going to be?" And I was like, "No, I don't know." And he was like, "Hey, let me call you right back." He went and called, I guess, Mono, and ended up calling me back and said, "What if I and PGC became the co-hosts?" And we started talking through, and I was like, wow, this is incredible. He was already familiar with the podcast because he'd been doing our halftime talks with Alan. They are incredible people at PGC. TJ's incredible. We already had some chemistry and a relationship. And I started thinking, wow. And PGC would put all their time and effort and energy behind it. So it worked out amazing. I couldn't have been happier. It's allowed me to get even closer to the PGC family over the years, which has been a huge blessing because they, like I said, are so incredible. TJ and I think we've got great chemistry. I think I'm a little bit more fiery on episodes. I'm sort of leading the themes and the topics week to week. I'm creating all the different episode ideas. And TJ's just being who he is, just very down to earth, very centered always, and offering great perspective. And TJ, let's not get it twisted. He coaches D2 basketball. He'd be one of the best Division I basketball coaches in the country if he chose to do it. He's that good.
I agree. I think that's one of the things that it's not a lesson just for TJ, but I think it's kind of a theme that's run through our show is there are great coaches at every single level of basketball. You could find high school coaches who would be tremendous coaches at the college level, and vice versa. You could find tremendous college coaches who would be outstanding at the high school level or at the pro level. And I think it's just a matter of sometimes there's a perception out there of what level you coach at certifies what type of coach you are and how good you are, and that's not necessarily the case. I think there are great coaches at every level, and TJ is certainly an example of that. Who he's not a household name that you're going to see on TV every Saturday afternoon, but he's certainly a guy who can coach. And if you've listened to the Hardwood Hustle, you know that he can share and talk the game and get points across that help coaches and help players who are listening to improve themselves. And really, that's kind of what the platform's all about.
He's too focused and committed on impacting and pouring into people to be a Division I coach. And I know that may sound interesting to some because they could say, well, wouldn't he have a bigger platform Division I? Sure. But he's got a situation right now where he's able to coach a Division II while leading parts of PGC, while leading Key 5 coaching, while co-hosting a Hardwood Hustle podcast platform, right? You go and you jump into a new, not saying he doesn't have pressure now, but a new Division I, high profile, like a lot of that stuff probably has to go. And I don't know exactly, but my guess would be that it would. And he wants to serve. He, as much as he wants to coach and as good as he is, I mean, that's where his heart is.
No doubt. I think that when you start thinking about how you arrange your life as a coach, we all know the challenges of time and balancing that, your ambition as a coach with your family and your other obligations and the things that you do. And so you got to find that equilibrium that works for you. And clearly TJ loves doing what he does with you on the Hardwood Hustle. He loves the PGC piece of it. And then, the coaching during the season at Emmanuel gives him the opportunity to impact young people. And really, in all honesty, that's what it's all about. Adam, we're pushing up against the time limit here. So I want to give you a chance before we get out to share how people can find out more about what you're doing at Lead 'em Up, find out more about how they can listen to the Hardwood Hustle, how they can connect with you. Just give us all your social media platforms, connections, just ways that people can get in touch with you.
Yeah, if you're a coach, would love to get you connected to Lead 'em Up. You'd have access through our digital curriculum to all of our themes, concepts, exercises that you can use with your team. You can get signed up and set up at leademup.com and get access to that. If you're in one of the regions where we've got a regional coach, you absolutely could take advantage of them. And we also travel, right? And are willing to work with teams and they're able to work with teams around the country. We're obviously doing a lot of virtual work right now. So if, to Mike's point, you need that second voice, right, that alternate voice, and you want to have that, we're certainly open and willing to help serve you there. So Lead 'em Up is it's continuing to roll. We've got a lot of great things in the pipeline. Our big thing, which I teased a little bit on Instagram just recently, we're gearing up for a rollout and a build-out of an in-school curriculum for the 2021-2022 school year. We're currently piloting Lead 'em Up in school at 4 different schools around North America. I say North America because one of the schools is up in Canada that's testing it and piloting this in-school curriculum. We are super excited about that. We've just had so many inquiries over the years from coaches who are also teachers, most of the cases, say, man, I would love to teach this in my class with my students. And we've never allowed it just for a variety of reasons. Now we're starting to move in that direction to be able to provide that. So that's a big thing that we're looking at here in the future. But yeah, I'd love to connect. You can follow me on social media at abradley5. Check out our podcast, Hardwood_Hustle, on Twitter and Instagram. But Mike, I appreciate you guys having me on. And I just want to celebrate you guys for all that you all are doing, right? I was certainly looking into some of the things, and you guys have your network, and you guys are gaining shows and trying to build this platform, and you guys are clearly hustling, and you're doing it the right way, right? Just some of the attention to detail in preparation of today's episode communicates to me that, you guys just aren't sitting down willy-nilly just trying to host a podcast, right? Like, you guys are trying to be intentional. You're trying to be strategic. You're trying to grow. You're trying to produce great quality content and trying to build something special. So I just want to celebrate you guys for that.
Well, thanks. We appreciate that, Adam. Those kind words are always well taken and well received. And we can't thank you enough for taking time out of your schedule to jump on here with us tonight for almost an hour and a half and share the things that you've been able to do over the course of your career, both from an entrepreneur building business standpoint and also a basketball standpoint, and pouring into coaches and pouring into teams and pouring into players, and really looking to serve, as you said, multiple times throughout the episode tonight. So again, thank you for coming on. We really do appreciate it. And to everyone out there, thanks for listening, and we will catch you on our next episode. Thanks. If you have an existing podcast or are looking to launch your own pod but aren't sure where to start, the team at My Podcast Manager can help. Our podcast team works behind the scenes so you can do what you do best. We'll help you launch your podcast, make it sound great, and free up your time for the more enjoyable parts of podcasting. If you're ready to put your podcast editing, production, and promotion on autopilot with a trusted team of podcasting professionals, visit mypodcastmanager.com to get started.
Thanks for listening to the Hoop Heads Podcast, presented by Head Start Basketball.